Picture this. It's somewhere between 30,000 and 70,000 years ago. You don't know that, obviously. You don't know anything about years. You don't have a word for year. You have fire, you have hunger, you have the people sitting next to you, and you have the dark. The dark is enormous. It is not the dark of a power outage or a camping trip or a city block when the streetlights go out. It is absolute. It is in every direction, and it goes forever. And the only thing pushing back against it is the small circle of orange light that you and your group have kept alive since before anyone can remember. Because letting it die is not an option. You've had a long day, longer than you have words for. Your feet hurt, your back hurts. Someone in the group is sick and you don't know why, and there's nothing you can do about it. And that specific helplessness is something humans have always felt, and probably always will. You eat what there is to eat. You sit. The fire pops and shifts. And then you look up. The moon is out tonight. Big, almost full, hanging there like something that was placed deliberately. You've seen it 1,000 times. Every person in your group has seen it 1,000 times. It rises, it changes shape over the course of nights you've learned to count without numbers. It disappears, it comes back. It is as ordinary as breathing. Except tonight, for reasons you couldn't explain even if you had the language to try, something shifts. You're not looking at the moon to navigate. You're not checking it for weather. You're not doing anything useful at all. You're just looking at it. And somewhere in the back of your skull, in a region of your brain that is doing something no brain on this planet has quite done before, a question forms. Not, what is it? Not, where does it go? Something stranger and more useless and more profound than either of those. Why? Why is it there? Why does it change? Why does it keep coming back?
Why does it look the way it looks tonight? Huge and pale and close enough that it seems like you could reach it if you climbed high enough. Which you won't try, but the thought crossed your mind, and that might be the most human thing that has ever happened.
This is not a story about the moon. The moon hasn't changed. It was there before us, and it will be there after us, and it has no opinion about any of this whatsoever. This is a story about that question. Where it came from, what it cost us, and why everything you've ever learned, every piece of science, every religion, every myth, every telescope ever pointed at the sky, traces a direct, unbroken line back to one person sitting in the dark, looking up, and asking something they had absolutely no practical reason to ask. Here's the thing nobody talks about when they talk about human intelligence. We share most of our cognitive toolkit with other animals. Memory, pattern recognition, spatial reasoning, problem solving, emotional processing, social hierarchy, even basic planning for the future. Crows do it, elephants do it, dolphins do it at a level that should make you genuinely uncomfortable about how we treat them. The gap between us and other animals is real, but it is not where most people think it is. The gap is not that we're smarter. The gap is that we ask why. Watch any animal navigate the world and you will see something extraordinary. A crow solves a multi-step puzzle to reach food. An elephant remembers a water hole it visited once, decades ago, and leads its herd back to it across hundreds of miles. A chimpanzee uses a stick as a tool, modifies the stick when it doesn't work, and teaches the technique to its offspring. These are not simple creatures running on instinct. These are minds at work. But every single one of those behaviors is pointed at something. Food, water, safety, reproduction. The question underneath all animal cognition, if you could translate it, is some version of, how do I survive this? How do I get that? How do I stay alive until tomorrow? That is a perfectly reasonable question. It is in fact the most important question biology has ever produced. And for roughly 4 billion years of life on this planet, it was the only question that mattered. Then something happened in the human brain. Nobody knows exactly when, nobody knows exactly how. But at some point, the circuitry that evolved to ask, how do I get that, started occasionally firing with no survival target in front of it. Started turning inward, started pointing at things that offered nothing in return. The moon, the stars, the fact that you exist at all. The question underneath those moments isn't, how do I survive this?
It's something more like, what is this even? Why does any of this exist? Why am I the one looking at it? Philosophers call this kind of thinking about thinking metacognition. Cognitive scientists talk about recursive self-awareness, the ability to think about yourself thinking, to observe your own mind from the outside. But those terms flatten something that is actually strange and a little vertiginous when you sit with it. Because here is what that first why really means. It means a brain became aware that the world exists independently of its own needs. It means something looked at the moon and understood, on some level, that the moon does not care, that it was there before, that it will be there after, that the universe has no particular investment in whether you figure it out or not. That is not a survival thought. That is something else entirely. That is the beginning of everything we consider distinctly human. Philosophy, religion, science, art, all of it starts in the same place. A mind that learned to ask questions the world had no obligation to answer. So let's talk about what we actually know. Because this is the part where a lesser version of this story would go soft, would lean on poetry and feeling, and leave the facts conveniently vague. We're not doing that. The evidence is genuinely fascinating on its own terms, and it doesn't need to be dressed up. Here is the honest situation. We do not have a recording of the first human who looked at the moon and asked why. We do not have a diary entry, a cave painting with a caption, a dated inscription that says, "On this night, everything changed." The moment itself is gone. It dissolved back into the dark the same way every other moment from that era dissolved, leaving almost nothing behind. Almost nothing is not nothing. Start with the Ishango bone. It was found in 1950 on the shores of Lake Edward in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo. It is a baboon fibula, roughly 6 inches long, and it is covered in deliberate carved notches arranged in specific groupings. It dates to somewhere between 18,000 and 20,000 years ago. Researchers have spent decades arguing about what those notches mean. Some say it's a tally system. Some say it's a lunar calendar, a tally system. Some say it's a lunar calendar tracking the phases of the moon across months. What nobody argues is that somebody made them on purpose, carefully, with intention, which means somebody was tracking something across time for a reason that had nothing to do with immediate survival. You don't carve a bone to remember where the food is. You carve a bone because something in your mind needs to impose order on time itself. Then there are the burial sites. Across multiple continents, going back 30,000 years and further, archaeologists find human graves oriented with striking consistency toward the moon's path across the sky, or toward specific star positions, or toward the sunrise at particular times of year. These are not accidents of geography, these are choices. Somebody decided that the direction a dead person faced mattered, and that the sky had something to do with it. That is a cosmology. That is a belief system. That is a why given physical form in dirt and bone. There are the cave paintings at Lascaux in France, roughly 17,000 years old, which some researchers believe contain dot sequences that correspond to lunar cycles. The argument is contested, as good science always is, but the dots are real, and the patterns are real, and the people who made them were real, and they were clearly paying attention to something overhead. Here is what all of this adds up to. By the time we have any physical record of human thought at all, the moon is already in it, already being tracked, already being honored, already being used to organize time and death and meaning, which tells you something important. The why didn't start with the evidence. The evidence is just where the why finally left a mark. Let's get into the uncomfortable part, the part that requires you to think about your own brain from the outside for a second, which is exactly the kind of thing we're talking about, so stay with it.
Most of what your brain does, you don't experience. Your visual cortex processes depth and color and motion continuously without you making any decisions about it. Your cerebellum coordinates your balance and movement without consulting you. Your autonomic nervous system regulates your heartbeat and your breathing and your digestion while you're busy thinking about something else entirely. The vast majority of the computation happening inside your skull right now is invisible to you. It just runs. Somewhere in human evolutionary history, something changed in the architecture of that system. A loop formed. The brain developed the ability to observe itself operating, to notice that it was noticing, to think about the fact that it was thinking. And that loop, that strange recursive fold in cognition, is arguably the most significant event in the history of life on this planet. Here's why the moon matters to that story specifically. The moon is the perfect object for triggering self-awareness in a species that's just beginning to develop it. And the reason is this. The moon doesn't respond to you. You can look at it, need it, fear it, feel things about it, and it will continue doing exactly what it was doing before you arrived, and exactly what it will do after you're gone. It is indifferent in the most absolute sense of the word. Every other thing an early human brain focused on had some relationship to the self. Food responds to being hunted. Predators respond to being fled from. Other people respond to everything you do. The entire social and natural world that early humans navigated was in constant dialogue with their presence in it. The moon is not in dialogue with anything. It simply is. And when a human brain first genuinely registered that fact, when it understood on some level that something exists completely outside of its own needs and feelings and survival, that was the moment the self became visible to itself. Because to understand that the moon doesn't care about you, you first have to understand that there is a you for it to not care about. That is not a small cognitive step. That is the birth of the observer. The part of the human mind that stands slightly outside experience and watches it happen. The part that generates every question that has ever mattered. Philosophy didn't come from logic. Religion didn't come from fear. Science didn't come from curiosity about practical problems. All of it came from a brain that looked at something indifferent and realized for the first time that it was looking. Go outside tonight and look at the moon. Not for navigation, not to check the weather, not to take a photo of it for your phone that will look nothing like what you're actually seeing because it never does. Just look at it the way that person looked at it. The one we've been talking about this whole time. The one sitting in the dark with a dying fire and no framework whatsoever for what they were feeling. You have every framework. You know what the moon is made of. You know why it has phases and what causes the tides and how far away it is down to the kilometer. You know that humans have walked on it, left equipment there, brought pieces of it back in sealed containers that are sitting in laboratories right now. You have more information about the moon in your phone than every human who ever lived before 1900 combined could have accessed in 1,000 lifetimes. And it still does something to you. That is the part nobody has fully explained. The knowing doesn't cancel the feeling. The science doesn't close the distance. You can understand exactly what you're looking at and still feel the pull of it, the strangeness of it, the sense that it is asking you something you don't quite have the language for yet. That feeling is not nostalgia. It is not irrationality. It is not a glitch in an otherwise logical system. That feeling is the original signal, the one that started everything, still transmitting across however many thousands of years separate you from the person who felt it first. The hardware hasn't changed that much. The moon certainly hasn't changed. And so the same loop still fires. The observer in you looks at the thing that doesn't look back, and something opens up that doesn't have a clean name. Here is what that means. You are not the end of this story. You are not the point at which the why finally got answered and humanity could relax. Every generation has believed it was close to the last question, close to the final explanation, close to the moment when the universe would finally make complete sense. Every generation has been wrong in the most productive possible way. The person at the fire didn't know they were starting something. They just felt something they couldn't ignore and followed it into the dark. That is still the job. That is still what the moon is for. Look up. Ask why. See where it goes.